He did not only have a child in Kenya, he had a child with a Chinese, he had a child in New York, and he had a child that was on the way in the same California. And I told her what had happened. And she said, "You don't have to worry. We can take care of this." And that was an abortion. So I had an abortion at 22 years old. My background is that I was born uh, a second born in a family of four, um, with my dad and my mom, and we grew up in Nyahururu, yeah, and then we moved to Nyeri at some point. And what I can say is that my family background is a very Christian background, brought up by a dad and a mom who very staunch Christians. Well, they used to have this, we call it the fellowship. That old fellowship revival is the one my parents belong to. And so being brought up, we were brought up very Christian. But growing up, I believed, or I know that I had this very, very strong love for God. And at 13 years old, that's when I gave my life to Christ. I remember we had gone with my mom and my dad to a fellowship. And so when we went for that fellowship, that's when I gave my life to Christ. And I was in grade 8 at the time. And so the following year, I went to high school. And then I went to high school. I went to Form 1 and 2 in a school called Shinga Girls High School. And then Form 3 and 4, I was in Karoti Girls High School. And Chiga Girls is a place that I didn't experience that fellowship as much. But when I went to Karoti Girls, it happened to be um, a Pentecostal. It was led by a Pentecostal background. So basically, the way we did everything was very, very Pentecostal. And coming from a PCA church now to a Pentecostal kind of a setting, it was very, very appealing to my spirit. It was very appealing. And so the Christian Union was very, very, very strong. And so I joined the Christian Union there, and at that time when I was in Form 3, what you'd call I believe grade 11, that is when I received the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And I remember it is something that was not happening with the PCA church, so it was a challenge. So basically, it's something that you practice when you're in school, but then you don't practice when you're at home. And so, going through high school, I had a very, I can call it a very good fellowship. We were a group of ladies, it being just a girls' school, it was a group of ladies that we joined with, that we used to pray together. And that is where for the first time, I learned how to fast and to pray. And I remember, well, what I can say about myself and my personality is that I am this kind of a person who, when I do something, I'm an extremist. So when I take on something, I go all the way. And so when it came to prayer and fasting, I remember being about the thinnest girl in the school, because I went from fasting for 1 day, then realized I'm fasting for 3 days, and then I go for 7 days. And actually, I got to a point where food lacked meaning. I was like almost obsessed with the fasting, because it was such a good feeling being there, being in that space of fasting and praying. And so I cleared high school, and then I was out of school. Of course, I had to stay home. I didn't manage to join the university, so I had to stay home for about a year, and then I joined college in Nairobi. And when I joined college, when I left the village, I decided I am not going back to the PCA church. And immediately I went to a Pentecostal church, which is, at the time, it was Nairobi Pentecostal Church. Now it's the CITAM, and is the CITAM church now today, which has spread all over the place, so and across the world. So that is where now I joined other people who were Pentecostal. And I remember being so involved, got into the discipleship class, and then I did the worst as far as PCA Church is concerned. I got water baptized, and I guess it was the best feeling ever. And then I got into the mission group, and actually then we actually started the mission group with a group of 5 men. We were 2 ladies, 5 men, and that group is the one that ended up being the main mission group across all the CITAM churches. But we started a group of 7. We used to go to places like, the remote places. I'm talking about sides of Kisumu, um, the most remote places where we could even sleep outside. So um, we had such a zeal for God, such a zeal for God, and it was so enjoyable. And I loved that life. I mean, it's the best life that I can say that I ever lived. For one, I was a girl who did not engage myself with the boys. I was a girl who was committed, so committed to serving God and doing the things that God loved. And the fellowship was so perfect and so good. But at the age of 22, that is when there was a turn of events, a huge turn of events, because at that point in time is when I got, um, what do I call it? I was engaged in a situation where I got raped. And when I got raped at the age of 22, I was a virgin, because growing up, my mom always used to give us this verse in the Bible that every other sin is outside of the body, but the sin of fornication is with the body. So I feared the sin of fornication. And I used to love family so much. I intended, or I had prayed that I would get married before I was 30 and have 4 kids. And so this happens in a situation that I never foresaw coming. This happened to be, you know how you are in out of school and your college friends and you hang out together. Yeah, and this one particular person in this group that I was in happened to lose a dad. And when he lost a dad, normal gesture, buying a sympathy card and taking to this person. And I took the card to him where he lived in hostels, and they were Christian hostels. And so I when I took the card, I knew that ladies don't get into that environment. They don't get into the boys' hostel. So he invited me in. He invited me in, and I think I was too innocent. When he invited me in for a cup of coffee, I went in innocently, but it was like a hallway, because the hostels are like dorms. And we walked, and his room was all the way far at the end. And so when we got to the end of the hallway, he opened the door from behind me. He opened the door, and I got in, and he was behind me, and he grabbed me. And at that moment in time, he raped me in a matter of it seemed like a fraction of a second, but it was so fast, so quickly, and I fought it through. I fought through the whole experience, and then after it was said and done, I I had actually had trousers, and I put back my clothes on and walked out, and that was it. I went into the apartment where I used to live with a cousin of mine, and I went there and I cried myself to sleep, and I never said a word to my cousin, and that was done. And we never spoke a single word with this person. So I just walked out, and that was done. And so the next thing that happened, like a month down the line, then I was working as a secretary. So a month down the line, I just felt funny. And in my mind, I was like, I could be pregnant. And I realized that I had missed my period, something that I never really used to get concerned about, because it was a non-issue. But anyway, I realized I was pregnant, and knowing my mother, knowing my Christian background, knowing the friends that we were with at the church, knowing my mission group, um, I was like, I cannot have this child. And indeed, I talked to a friend of mine, and this friend used to be a friend of this particular guy. And I told her what had happened. And she said, you don't have to worry. We can take care of this. And that was an abortion. So I had an abortion at 22 years old. And what I can say after being growing up in a Christian family, then um, giving myself to God wholly and totally, and living such a pure life. Even when other girls my age used to do all kinds of stuff, some would be pregnant in high school and all. I I lost myself completely. What I can say is that I lost my soul. And I always look back and I say that I was walking dead because my soul was gone, literally gone. And this is a pain that was so overwhelming. And I decided, I think it's a mental thing that happens. Your emotions decide that they will put this emotional pain somewhere at the back. And somehow I ended up going on to nab my pain. And the way I nabbed my pain was getting into alcohol. And it's amazing how the enemy, when the door now has been opened for the enemy, it's amazing how he brings all the circumstances that support the thoughts that you're having in your mind. So for me to think that I'm not going to have a child, someone was brought into the picture that was going to support the decision that I was making, which was killing an unborn child. And I knew then I was a fornicator, I was a murderer, and now I've gone on and I have met friends who go drinking because a lot of my friends, a lot of people those days used to go from work, they go hang out, and then they go home, come back to work, and the same used to happen because, working 8 to 5, that's what used to happen. So anyway, I would join my friends, we would go drink, and like I said, I'm an extremist. I went from having a social drink after work to having a drink every day to having to drink as in 24 hours. So the only time that I was not drinking is when I was asleep. And so, with the hate that I had developed towards men at this point in time, I nothing to lose. And being in the pubs, being in the bars, being in anywhere that people were having fun, that's where I used to be. And because I hated men, I started using men. And I went into a life where I didn't care who I was with. That is the way, that is how my soul was so dead. I didn't care who I was with. And there was another pregnancy, there was an abortion, and I didn't care. I was just dead. I was just a human being that was moving through the world dead because somewhere back in my mind, I was like, if God loved me so much, why did he allow that to happen? Yet I know that he's capable of preventing it. And so life went on like that. That was in 1992, 93, thereabout. And then I drank and I drank heavily. And I used to live with a cousin somewhere in 1997, 1998. And by then I was dating this particular human being that would buy for me alcohol from AFCO. And so I had alcohol at work, I had alcohol at home, I had alcohol wherever I was. And I was now living with another cousin of mine. And I remember my cousin, uh, she feared that every day she woke up, she would first of all check whether I was still alive because the level of alcohol that I was consuming was really enough to kill someone. And somehow, by the grace of God, and I always say it's by the grace of God, one of the workmates decided to visit a friend, a sister in California, San Francisco area. And when he was away, he called and he asked me, would you care coming to the US? And I said, why not? He said, okay, fine, I'll sort some things out for you and then see if you can, come to the US. And so when he came back with an I-20. How he got it, I do not know. But I know that he asked for some few documents. Of course, then it used to be faxing. And so he came with an I-20 and he was like, oh, you try and go to the embassy. And that was, I needed to be in school in October. He came with that paperwork in September. And I worked on what I needed to work on, and then 30th of September is when I went to the embassy. And the day that I was going to the embassy, I did not care whether I got the visa. I was so much into alcohol that I really didn't care. To be honest, I really did not care. So even when I went to the embassy, I did not even think that there is something that is called the visa money that you need to pay. So when I went, I actually just had the fare to get there and the fare to get back. That's the time when the embassy was in on Mombasa Road after the bombing. It was on Mombasa Road. So I go to the counter. This time I have this confidence. The confidence of a person who's drinking is usually like over the moon. So I had drank the previous night. Of course, I woke up to a drink and then I go to the embassy. And then I went to the counter with my paperwork and I put the paperwork there with the documents that I'd been told, oh, I guess they need this and this and that. So I did. So the only question they asked me, so are you going? I said, I'm going to California. I'm going to a school. It's called Hayward. And I'm just going for a short time for a course. And they were like, okay, how long do you suppose you'll be there? I said 6 months. And then they were like, what do you do? I said, I'm an executive secretary. And then they were like, how much do you earn? At that point in 1999, earning 40K was some good money. So I said, I earn 40K. It just popped up in my mind because I mean, you don't expect what questions you're going to get. And then they were like, the guy was like, okay, fine, just take your paperwork to the next window and get your visa in the afternoon. So I take my paperwork to the next window, and then I'm told it's 700 Kenya shillings. So I'm like, okay. I told the lady, give me 1 minute. So I look around. I had already, I had learned the art of getting through life. So I look around. In 1999, someone with a cell phone was a very rich person. So I looked around. I saw a man talking on the phone. And I went up to him and I was like, excuse me. He said, okay. I told him, I've been given a visa, but I have no money. Can I get 700 and I will look for you. I'll give you back the money. So the guy is like, sure, sure, sure. The person gave me 1,000 and I went to the counter and I paid the 1,000. And then after that, of course, I went away. Oh, sorry. I went to the counter. I gave the 1,000 and then I was given, of course, the change. And so after that, I was told, you know what, come for your visa at 3 p.m. So after that is when, of course, I went away. It was maybe about 11. And so I took that break and coming back, I got my visa. And then the person who had given me the 1,000, I saw him as well. And he had gotten his visa. I think he was getting a business visa. So in 14 days, I left the country and got to the US. And then I got to San Francisco because that is where my college was. And there's a lady that had said that she was going to pick me up from there. But there is also the place that I was supposed to have been going. But they called on the morning when I'm leaving in the evening at 10. They called in the morning and they said that there was change of plan and they had no place for me to stay. So I'm thinking, okay. So we had to think very quickly. So we remembered I had my cousin in Los Angeles, and so we made plans, and she called someone in San Francisco who would pick me up. And so we were set. And so I left Nairobi and headed to San Francisco. I got to San Francisco at 12:30 in the afternoon. And then, out of the excitement, I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna hang around, and then at about maybe 2 p.m. thereabout, I can call the person, and then the person can come pick me up. And I did hang around, and then I called the person. And when I called this person, they asked me, first of all, I called a couple of times. They didn't pick up. I called, and when I got the person asked me, so what are your plans? I said, I am here to go to college. But this so and so was supposed to pick me up, but they said there was change of plan. And so my cousin gave me your number. So she asked, how do you know her? I said, our mothers are sisters. And then she tells me, the lady doesn't even know you. And personally, I don't have any space for you. And from the look of things, you don't sound like you have a plan. So this is about 2 in the afternoon. I'm in San Francisco airport, and the person has said they're not coming to pick me up. So I was there. I now had to look for a way. How do you call Kenya? And it was very confusing, but eventually one white guy saw a black person and told me that black person will help you figure out how to call Kenya. Anyway, I was able to call, I was able to get my mom, and she was able to connect me. I was able to get connections to Los Angeles. I don't even know how I hadn't brought with me the number for my cousin. And so we were able to get a hold of her. But now it was late, and I was told the only bus that comes from San Francisco to Los Angeles would be in the morning at 10 a.m. So that meant that I was going to stay at the airport for the night. And then I just saw a lady there that was hanging around with her dog, and I hanged out with her, and we were able to get through the night because I had been told if you found at the airport and you don't look like you know where you're going, they are going to deport you. And I did not want to take that risk of being deported back to Kenya. So anyway, I was able to get out of there in the morning. I was able to get to the Greyhound, and I was able to get a bus at 10 and get to LA at about 8. So I counted from the moment I left Kenya to the moment that I got my head on a bed. It was a whole 52 hours later, and that was not fun. Anyway, my life in the US started as a challenge. And so for quite a while, actually not for quite a while, just 2 weeks, I got there 16th of October, but on the 31st, I got a nanny job. So when I got a nanny job, it was an engineer and a doctor, a dentist. And one used to sleep upstairs, the other one used to sleep in the basement, and I was taking care of the kids. And they were separated, but of course they couldn't stay separately because of child support. Of course, I didn't know all these. I didn't know all those things. I just used to know there's someone who sleeps in the basement and another one who sleeps upstairs, and I stay with the babies in the middle ground. Anyway, so now because the engineer guy did not used to actually go to work every day, he had his hours, but for some reason he used to drink. Before I knew it, I was back to alcohol again. And so, like I said, there is a way that the enemy just knows how to create just the right environment to ruin your life. So that was it. And then I was working there until December. And then my cousins obviously demanded that I needed a course. So I left and I went to do a course in nursing. And it was a 3 months course. So after that, I was at my cousins for just about 8 months. In June of the following year, I got my own place and started working 2 jobs and everything. And by September, I had to start school. So for a while at my cousin's, obviously I stayed trying not to drink, but that did not leave. When I started working, getting some money, it was somehow contained by the fact that I had to work 2 jobs and then go to school full time for me to maintain my student status. So that helped for a while. But soon as after I was done with school, and then I was able now to take a break. I took a break to back to Kenya. I came back for a little while for my brother's wedding and also an aunt that had passed on. But when I went back, I decided, you know what, I'm not going back to school as an international student. It's too much money. And I still wanted to have my fun life. So I went back to fully going to work. And so that element of alcoholism continued, and now it continued heavily. Then obviously I was hanging out with people who were smoking, and I started smoking cigarettes. And like I said again, I do it all the way. So when I started smoking, I smoked and I smoked hard. When I was drinking, I drank and I drank hard. And so by this time I'm trying to hold on to salvation, but it wasn't even there. I was too traumatized. And I think what we do when we are so traumatized, we numb the pain and we want to forget about the pain. And I actually wasn't doing it on purpose. I just knew I was doing things that I didn't want to do and the things that I hated doing. In fact, I remember how badly when first moved to Nairobi, I used to live behind a pub, and I used to hate that music, and I used to hate people who were drunk, and I used to really get disgusted by the smell of alcohol. And right now, I was right in the middle of everything that I really, really disliked when I was, growing up a Christian girl. And it got worse. I mean, I struggled through life. I struggled through work. I struggled through school because even the international student going to school as an international student, it was not even focused on it was focused on being a nurse, but I did take a non-resident, no, a resident class as a as a licensed nurse. So I was able to do that and actually graduate and get my license as a nurse. But the drinking continued. And at some point, you come from being a social drinker to being a drunkard to being, what do we call it, to being a functioning alcoholic. I was in that space of being a functioning alcoholic for quite some time. And it ruined my jobs. I crashed many times. And I lost jobs, but I would hop from one job to the other, one job to the other, and it was a struggle. It was a real, real struggle. And so during that time, um, some things were wake up calls, but I think I was so deep in drinking that those wake up calls didn't mean anything. And by the police and being pulled over. And then they would figure that I'm drunk, and then I'll be taken to the cell until I'm sober, and then they would release me, and then I would have to have someone come and pick the car for me and things like that. So some of those were wake up calls. Other times I would go to work, and then they didn't want to report my license, so I was just dismissed from work. So I had many wake up calls, but none of them really worked until it came a time somewhere in 2010. In 2008, I lost my best friend that we used to drink with a lot. And what happened to my best friend is that she was not alcoholic, but she used to do drugs. And we used to smoke together, but I did not do drugs. And at some point, she was very, very depressed. And when she lost her life in 2008, May, I became very, very, very alcoholic. In fact, that time I started losing everything. And I remember my parents coming to visit in 2009. I invited them, they came, and my mom saw my state, and it didn't look good. Um, and what I know and I believe is that even after the short time that they stayed with me, they realized that I was suffering and I was struggling, but they didn't say much. But what I know is that when my mom got back to Kenya, she prayed and they prayed. And when they came in 2009, April. And between that time, when I was now at, okay, before I get there, 2009 is when they came. And now between 2009 and 2010, and all these things were happening between May, because May of 2008 is when I lost my best friend. She overdosed on some drugs. And then 2009 May is when my parents were visiting. And between 2009 May and 2010 April, everything that I was holding on to started disappearing. I lost my job, I lost my apartment, and I had crashed my cars, and I now was driving a car that was given by my mechanic of a long time. So he just gave me a car to be using around, because the others he was just selling, scrap metal, because some were. I had two cars and they were banged very badly. So basically, I was using his car, and I got to a point where I started living in that car. Um, and then, okay, when I lost my apartment, a friend of mine took me in. And when she took me in, she thought that that would stop the alcohol, but it didn't stop the alcohol. And I had gotten to a point, I know that someone watching this would wonder, yes, you're losing your jobs, you don't have any money and all that, but how are you getting the alcohol? I had gotten to a point where I started shoplifting alcohol, and shoplifting alcohol in the United States takes a real brainer. And what I would do is that I would fill this cart with things, bulky stuff like tissue papers and stuff like that. And then I would put my bag in there, and then I would just throw in a whole bottle. I made sure that I would pick the biggest, because I don't want to have to come back. And so I would make sure that no one has seen me through the cameras. And when I learned the art of doing that, I did it, and I did it badly, and that was going to kill me. So when I ended up living in my car, we know where to go. I've lost my apartment. I put my things in storage. Um, I now had to think about my life. And I thought, that moment in time, I have nowhere to shower. I mean, used to go to a McDonald's, and then, try to clean up with their tissues and everything. But I got to a point, I was like, I'm really gonna die, because this time round, I wasn't eating anything. I was just drinking dry, hard liquor. And I was so thin. I was so looking very, very hopeless. And I realized that I was gonna die. And so when I realized I was gonna die, what I did, I was like, I'm to go back to my cousin. I was living at a shopping center, outside Albertsons, and my cousins were living in Covina. So I decided I will try and drive to Covina and talk to my cousin, my cousin's husband, and tell him that I am going to be dying. And when I do, because I knew that I was going to be killed by this alcohol, when I do, I don't want my parents not to know what happened. I would want you to let them know what happened. And since I went to his office, he looked at me, and I was looking very bad. I mean, My hair had not been combed for so long. I had some funny hat on my head. I had shoes that were not even looking alike. And I know I was smelling very, very badly. But what my cousin did was like he looked at me. He had never seen me like that. He didn't know this side of me would get that bad, but he had an idea that I used to drink, but it would never have been this bad. So anyway, he just woke up, hugged me, and I remember he told me, I cried, and I cried so hard. And what I remember is that he asked me, "Do you need help?" And I said, "Yeah." But of course, I was scared. And I said, "Yeah, I would like to be helped." So we talked for a bit, and I told him, oh, and I remember when I was crying, all I was saying, "I just want to die. I just want to die." And then I remember him, after we talked, I was composed, and he asked me to go to the house. The mother was staying with them. So I went to the house. I drove to the house. I still had my stolen alcohol in the car. And I went and I took a shower and I dressed in some clothes that were in the house, my cousin's clothes. And I was there. And in 2 days, my cousin was able to find a rehab. The name of the rehab is Youth for Christ, is in Paris, California, somewhere in San Bernardino. So I I was taken to a rehab I agreed to sign up for 60 days. And I was there at the rehab. And when I got in, I was very, very scared. I was scared because I did not know the last life I remember without alcohol or sober is before the rape. And now I'm in a rehab. I can't access alcohol. I can't access cigarettes. And I was very scared. But what happened was I got into a space where everybody understood everybody. And it felt safe, but it felt scary because at the time I used to have extreme tremors. Tremors that would not allow me to stay even for a minute without alcohol in my system. And I remember these are the tremors that put me into being drunk 24/7 because I couldn't drive without before drinking. I couldn't go to work before drinking. There is nothing, absolutely nothing I could do. Even eating food, I could not eat food before drinking. I had to have alcohol in my system for me to feel stable and for me to think and for me not to have tremors, palpitations, and other feelings that are just out of this world, bad feelings. Anyway, so I got in with my tremors, my cravings for cigarettes and everything. And in the first week, I had insomnia, which is one of the withdrawal symptoms. And I'm telling you, my life was flashing through my mind in the middle of the night where I can't get any sleep. It's dark, it's quiet, and my life was flashing across my mind. And I looked back at where I came from and how I grew up and all the things that I have done up to this point in my life. And it was a very scary experience. And I remember up to the seventh day, this lady came. She came and she shared a testimony. And her testimony was how she had been on the streets in downtown Los Angeles, and she was a mother of one. And what happened was that she used to keep hiding and she would do drugs and she would hide with her baby because she did not want her baby to be taken away by the social workers. So she was giving a testimony. Looking at her, I was like, oh my God, she's giving a testimony and she doesn't even look like it. It's something that gave me some level of hope. And when she was preaching, she said, she looked at me at some point. At that point in time, I was really crying and sobbing. I could not understand why. But I remember her looking at me and she said, there is something that you have to forgive. And this was 15 years after the rape. And this is the first time in 15 years it just clicked in my head, the rape. And I was like, oh my God. You mean all these years, everything that I've been going through is because of the rape and then the abortion? It was a very painful moment. It was a very, very painful moment. And she held me and she hugged me, and I wept and I sobbed, and it was so hard. And so it took me, I mean, I still had to be there for quite some time. And that was such a time of reflecting. Everything came back. I mean, it came flashing through my mind, and I had to find a place. I started learning about forgiveness. I started learning about so many things. I mean, my wound had just been opened up. Now it was flesh, and it's something now that needed to be dealt with. And I'm in a space where I am safe. And the one thing I thank God for the United States is that people don't hide things. They just talk and they say everything. And I was in that space where I was just not talking. And then there was a time where we had to be baptized. You're restored, so now you have to be baptized. And I remember our pastor was Pastor Jerry, and I remember I got baptized by immersion again. This is now my that baptism in my life, and it feels very refreshing. And so I was there for 60 days, and I came out of the rehab, and I was so fired for God. The fire that was there before the rape was back, and my God, I had to go back and live with my cousin, and then I left my cousin's place. I went to live with my friend. She had a big family. It was a whole house full of about 10 people. So anyway, I'm there. I don't have a job. I don't have a car. I mean, I was just there. And so I was really high on God. I was so high on God. And I went into the rehab looking very thin. In fact, a lot of people really thought around that time before the rehab that I had HIV. And so when I came out of the rehab, I was 3 times bigger. I mean, I was huge. And so people are looking at me. First of all, they're wondering where I was because I've been gone for a while. And then on top of that, I am so big and I look different. I don't look like the drunk that they knew. And this was California. And a lot of people, I would say in my mother tongue. They used to call me Wajakaria Kanyuwaga. That was my name in Los Angeles area, California, that side of California. So yeah, I was known for that, and because I caused drama everywhere I went, and that's when I realized, or later in life, it's when I've realized when you are hurting, and you don't even know what's hurting you, you hurt everybody else around you, and especially I remember I used to go into a club because I didn't used to spare men. When I saw men, they were my enemies, and I would call them all those names in Kikuyu when I got drunk. And so there are many places I would get into. My California friends will relate with this. I would get into a pub where there are Kenyans and they would leave one by one, and I would realize I'm by myself. They used to avoid me. I was the bitter drunk that I know, and it was a very bad experience. And the bitterness was coming from what was done to me. I had to do it to everybody, and that is a very bad space to be. Unfortunately, what happens is that when you're in that space, nobody understands you. You don't even understand yourself, and nobody is understanding you. So it is a very, very terrible place to be. And so I thank God that I came out of the rehab and I was out for about 11 months and things were getting heated up. The people, since I'd been in the US, nobody ever knew me sober. So I was in a world that I did not understand and they did not understand me. So I relapsed, and that was a very bad moment for me. And And I went and I got into a homelessness again. But that was not long. When I was there, I remember talking to my mom on the phone, and I went into a fasting and praying for in a shelter in downtown Los Angeles. I went into a prayer and fasting for 5 days. And I got back to my friend's house, but I did not mention what had happened, that I had relapsed, I had drank. And so when I got back, by the grace of God, I got a job. And now I started joining groups of people who I knew now, they can support me spiritually, because I didn't know that world the whole time I was in the US. I didn't know the world of the Christians. I knew the world of the drunkards. And by this time, one of my cousins that we used to drink heavily with had died when I was in the rehab. And that had really hit me hard. And I would say between 2008, when my best friend died, to 2016, friends who used to come and hang out in my apartment, my good friends, people we used to drink with, people that I used to drink harder than they did. In fact, I don't think any of them drank harder than I did. 14 of them in a span of 8 years, they all died. And when I looked back, I was like, why is God sparing me? Because I am the one who's supposed to be gone. And I remember when I came out of the rehab, my friend, she took me for a checkup. And for some reason, there was nothing in me that had been destroyed. My liver was intact, my kidneys were good, everything was good. And I was like, the place in my apartment where I used to throw up when I was so drunk, the carpet had holes because of the acid that I used to throw up. And I was asking myself, how come the alcohol has not damaged my body? And this alcohol that is making holes in the carpet is the alcohol that is coming from my body system. And I knew God has a reason why He's sparing my life. And before I knew, now I am in a space where I've gone back to work. I have joined Christian, groups that I'm getting support. And so at some point, I had to move. You know how they usually say that when you're in an environment that has so many triggers, the best thing sometimes is to move to a ground that you don't know anybody. Friendships are different, people are different. And I moved to San Diego, and I got a job, and I was working there. And at some point, I lost my job. And while I was losing my job, I had met someone. Remember, this time I'm approaching my 40s, and I'm thinking, girl, you need to get some man, you need to get married. And I was like, I need to get married. Now, the love for marriage was stronger now, like, than the love for church, for God, for Jesus. And I met this man who represented everything that I needed or I wanted in a man. And looks are very deceptive. And he also happened to be a man from my village. And for some time, I convinced this person, or I let him know my faith, number one. Number two, I also let him know that we cannot have any intimacy before marriage. And and he knew my principles. I had my boundaries. And unfortunately, what happened was I decided not fortunately, what happened, I went into a prayer for 3 days, and I prayed, and God gave me an answer, because after I came out of that prayer place, the person called and said, I'm a man and I have needs. And so for that reason, we are not going to be able to continue with this relationship. That was an answered prayer. But me, and I agreed. Yeah, fine. Okay. Go your way, I go my way. Fine. But come Valentine's, that was in January, and came Valentine's, and he happened to text and wish me a happy Valentine's. And that kind of made me miss him. And I called him. And when I called him, my goodness, we asked each other what we were doing, and I wasn't doing anything. He wasn't doing anything. And I'll tell you the truth. Oh my God. I decided to go visit him. And to even make matters worse, I offered to bring a bottle of wine. Remember, I've been sober, to bring a bottle of wine. Before I knew it, so he said, if you can have wine, then it means you can do other things. And yeah, one thing led to the other. And before I knew it, I had moved in with this man. But I'll tell you that a child of God will always be a child of God. And as the Bible says that him that he loves, he disciplines and severely. I was in that relationship for 2 years. But the punishment that I received in that relationship was so severe that I barely came out alive. Because once I got in, I realized I knew this man was single, no babies. I mean, he's just this very handsome man who's just been waiting for Wanja. How deceiving. Sometimes you'd think that your age allows you to know that some things are not real. And that is what the one thing that I know everybody who listens to my story will always ask. Like Wanja, your age, it doesn't allow you to realize that men are deceiving, especially when they want you so badly. And so I got into the box, and before I knew it, in the first month of being in that relationship or that situationship of even living together, remember I'd lost my job in San Diego, so I've moved in a place it's called Lake Elsinore. And so in the first 1 month, I had learned that he did not only have a child in Kenya, he had a child with a Chinese, he had a child in New York, and he had a child that was on the way in the same California. My God. I was like, you know what? Don't you worry. I will support you in taking care of this baby as long as you have nothing to do with that lady. And he said, yeah, it is just you. So, anyway, in the span of 2 years, I had 3 miscarriages, very painful miscarriages. Being a child of God, I knew that this is punishment. And it was a very depressing time because by the time I got the third miscarriage, in total, this was the fourth miscarriage. This person, the lady, was pregnant with the second child. And so you can imagine the pain of going through that miscarriage, plus there is another child being born of the same man. What? And I remember I after miscarriages are very painful for anybody who's gone through a miscarriage. They're very, very painful. And I remember when it was done and I was told you have miscarried, I called 911. They came, picked me up. I was living by myself. He'd moved in with this other lady who was bearing children for him. So they told me when I got to the hospital, I was checked and everything. I was told that you've lost the baby. It was 3 months. And I told them, just clean me up. I do not want to feel the pain of letting out whatever, you know. And so when that happened, that is the one time that I bought. First of all, there was a ton of events over there where I had now to separate myself completely from this person. He's moved on, and I'm here and hanging on to nothing. And so what happened was that I moved from that neighborhood and I went and I got my own place. And when I got my own place, I remember one time I decided to take alcohol enough to kill me. And I actually told God, I'm going to be taking this alcohol. And going to drink it so that I knew that if you drink alcohol after a very long time, the tolerance level has already gone up high. So you take more than you'd regularly take if you're continually taking alcohol. So I knew if I finish this bottle, I'll either be dead because I had heard of many deaths from toxic, you know, alcohol toxicity. So I knew that this alcohol is going to kill me. So I was in that space where I was like, if I come out alive, it's okay. If I die, it's okay. And so I finished it and I went to sleep. But I can tell you for a fact that at some point, I felt like my spirit leaving, my soul leaving my body. And I have never begged God like that, like, please let me not die. Let me not die. And so when I stopped, when I woke up, when I was able to drag myself up to being awake, I remember telling God, I just now need you to let me know exactly where am I in this world. And so at that point is when I went into a place. This time I'm living in a room in a house, and I decided I'm going to go into prayer. I am going to go into fasting. I am going to go into the word, and I'm just going to listen to things that can heal me because this is already too much. There's too many cycles in my life. I need to separate my life from these cycles. So what I did, I was in that space. I was going to work. I didn't have a car, so I would take buses. I would go to work and then get back to my little room over there, and then I continued of uh in that space of seeking God. And it's in that season of about 9 months, 10 months that I started learning about the fact that when you have carried too much trauma and you don't heal from the trauma, what happens is that you build on that trauma. And because of the trauma that I experienced with the rape, and then with the abortions, and then with um, going into relationships where I was constantly rejected, constantly because of my lifestyle. I would be with someone, and before I knew it, they have either disappeared or they've told me that they do not want to continue with that relationship again. So I was constantly being rejected. So all this was wrapped up in me because there's one thing I figured there's one thing knowing Christ, and there's another thing having so many words in you that they do not even allow any space for the word of God to grow. And my saving grace was my foundation of growing up as a Christian girl. That was my saving grace. And so I realized that I was too wounded, and I was not having, um, what can I call it? I was just having too many wounds. And so God gave me this vision for women, and I called it the Sisters Workshop. And my theme is usually the issues in our tissues, because as women, even as human beings, it's not. Even the Bible says it's not what we eat, is what is eating us. Or rather, the theme of my vision was it's not what we are eating, is what is eating us. And so, what was eating me was everything that I had built from that space where I got raped, I had an abortion, and then I built other crazy things, even being out there with people. I mean, it takes away so much from a person. And so there was so much healing that I needed to do. And the other thing that I also realized is that my essence draws people to myself that are going through the same stuff. Because when I looked back at this person that I moved in with, I studied his life and his past, and I realized that he also was carrying too many wounds. And I think we were, not that I think, but I know that we all both had a void that we were trying to fill each other's void. And so in that season of trying to fill the other person's void, we were putting each other down. And that is why that relationship would never have worked. And then again, obviously, me being the person um, who God has to keep an eye on, and he would never let go of my hand. I knew that he was not going to let me be in a space where what he has called me for was not going to manifest. And so I was in that space, and that vision that God gave me is that vision of the sisters workshop, where I have women come into a space where they are able to talk about the issues that they are going through, and I had a workshop. I had one in Arizona, I had one in California, I also had one in Houston, and they picked very well. But I had started working. I had bounced back to everything. I moved to a place and now had my own apartment, was had my own, I got my own car, and everything just was falling into place, and it was falling into place very well. And so I was now just settling and all that. And so come 2015, I lost my job. 2015, May again. Wow, May. I lost my job, and then I was without a job. Um, I had to lose my apartment, and so I stayed with a cousin. And towards the end of that year, because not so much was working. I remember we talked with my dad. He had not been feeling well for quite some time. And I remember we talked on my birthday, and he said that uh, your mom and I are praying for you because we would want you to come back home. Hmm. That bondage. So it's like you move from one bondage of, you know, having sexual, intimacy with people, to another bondage of being, in pornography, to another bondage of masturbation, and all this, they drain you as a person, and they drain your spiritual life. They drain you completely, and then you never look. You can go into gayism or into lesbianism. And I tried lesbianism at some point.